So how are you doing today, Strauss?
I'm doing pretty good. It was a bit of a long day, but I'm
Oh no.
happy I'm to the end of it.
Well, I'm glad it turned out well. It's been a quite a long day for me as well. I woke up early to work on YouTube stuff and pretty much just kept at it with a couple breaks. I went outside, I touched grass. So completely regular day. um, anything anything you're working on recently? Anything new that you have planned?
It's been a bit of a break from any fun stuff that I've been working on for the most part. Um, I shouldn't say any fun stuff. It's been a break for most of the YouTube and like streaming stuff that I typically do. I um, Earlier this year, from like November to March, was basically just like nonstop working on a video, or working
Oh yeah.
like something along those lines. Or I did like a charity stream around, I forget if it was February or March, but I did that, and then there was some other stuff, and it was just nonstop. Oh yeah, it was February, because one of the top charity goal was I would, in 2 weeks, put together a video essay, and I'll never do that again.
In only 2 weeks, did they get to decide the topic?
No, they didn't get to
Thank
decide the
goodness you were
topic.
that kind to
Yeah.
yourself. Like,
Yeah.
let someone else choose the topic of a video essay. Ooh. But still, a 2 week turnaround period. You're a madman.
Yeah, 2 weeks and working a full-time job and all my other responsibilities. It basically just meant that as soon as I would like be done for the day, like done like all my stuff, and I would go to like my like relaxation, whatever, I would sit down and I would work on it, and I would work on it till like 2 or 3 in the morning, and then keep going.
Gosh.
I was so worn out at the end of it that I was like, I am going to not think about a script or work on any video stuff for like
Yeah.
2 months. And the timing was really odd too, because like my channel's never been super popular, but right around I released that video, and one of my other videos, the identity, gender, and VR chat video, actually just got hit by the algorithm.
Yeah.
And so
It blew up a lot. I mean,
yeah.
you were apparently on that grind, and it paid off in a big way.
Yeah, it's perhaps not the best time to take a break, but I I told myself to stick to it anyway. I've never really been about the numbers or anything like that. This is strictly hobby territory for me. So I was like, I'm not going to feel pressure to do it. I'm going to stick to this. So for the last couple months, I've been trying to not think about it, but over the last week or two, I've started to put a script outline together, and maybe sometime July and August, I'll put another video out.
Yeah. I mean, I completely understand that. Like, there's always an opportunity to overwork yourself with YouTube. Well, you know who else could really use a break? The Gamers Tell All Video Game Podcast! Welcome, everyone! And today, we have with us Straws Films. Hi, Straws.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How'd you like that?
That's pretty good. That's pretty smooth. I really like that.
We try our best over here. So, it's been a while since we've done one of these podcasts on the channel, and to remind people who are new, because just like you had a video blow up on the algorithm recently, so have I, and I haven't done a podcast since then. The Gamers Tell All podcast is basically just about getting to know how we engage with games on a deeper level, one other intellectual YouTuber at a time. Yes, I'm calling you intellectual. You're going to have to take compliment. And we basically just ask the question, what's the most significant thing you've learned from playing a game? And we'll let the conversation go from there. So, Straws, I gotta ask, what game are we going to talk about? You're famous for VR chat, but you don't have to talk about VR chat here. You're free. You can talk about whatever you want.
You know, I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about it now for like the last week, and I'm like, oh, am I gonna talk about VR chat? Because I could.
You could.
I could. But I think if I want to be true to myself, there's a place where a lot of it all started before VR chat, where a lot of the ideas that I explore in my videos start. And I hint at this.
So we're going to dig deep. We're going to hit the id right away.
Yeah, we're going straight there.
What is this mysterious game that is foundational to your pathos?
It is going to be World of Warcraft. Specifically,
World of Warcraft.
I'm going to take you back to 2007 World of Warcraft.
Oh man, you even got a year. You got like this specific set of patches is the game, and everything else before or after was bad.
I have some strong opinions on World of Warcraft, let me tell you, but
My god.
I'm going to try and keep them in check to talk about one concrete thing at a time.
All right. Well, if we derail, I will try to re-rail us in some direction. But all right. So, World of Warcraft. Everyone's played it except for me. What is the most significant thing you've learned from playing World of Warcraft? I played Guild Wars. I played the wrong one. I was not playing the popular MMOs.
You know,
So tell me about it.
it's funny that you say that. I played a lot of extremely unpopular MMOs myself. WoW was actually, I'm like an old WoW person. I started in vanilla WoW. I think probably the January or February after it came out. But
Wow.
yeah, I've been around a long time. But before that, I played a bunch of MMOs.
So you got some of that legacy gear that everyone always wanted.
Probably somewhere I do. I haven't touched WoW probably in 3 years, something like that. But it definitely, it holds a special place in my heart. And one of the reasons why is because of my experience during the Burning Crusade, which was the expansion that was out in 2007. And it foundationally changed my life in a variety of different ways that, looking back, I never would have realized, or I never could have realized the through lines from there to the present. And you never really can, but some just the really big foundational changes.
So what was significant about the Burning Crusade that, say, the other updates before or after didn't do?
I think if I had to put a finger on it, the real big thing was always community. It was always community, and it was always what do I put under the banner of emergent gameplay, right? So
Okay.
the big thing for me was during that expansion. That's when I ended up getting into role playing, and it was something that I had done in previous MMOs, but never to the extent and the level and like the depth that I had in World of Warcraft. And the way that the game was set up at that particular time was that the individual server communities that you could be on,
Yeah.
you would join your realm or whatever, and that's where you were. The way those communities were set up is essentially Blizzard did very little in the way of helping out role-playing communities. It was all done. It was all the players. It was all up to them. So whatever was going on in the guilds that were role-playing and the storylines that they had, that was all managed by them. It was all managed by the individual communities. And then they could go out.
Role playing was very much interspersed with other players. I think there were a lot of webtoons, web series that also kind of poked fun at role players as being the odd man out in a group. There's this animated series called Tome, the Terrain of Magical Expertise, that I watched when I was younger. One of their loudest characters was a role player playing a gallant knight of some kind, but they were the only role player in the series. And it's my impression nowadays that there are very much intended from the developer role play servers that are set up, or at least communities organize an entire server to be the place for role play.
Yeah, so in World of Warcraft, from I don't know if it was the very beginning, but from pretty early on at least, there were role-playing servers. But what was new-ish was that near the end of vanilla, a little bit before Burning Crusade came out, were these things called RP PvP servers, which were basically in World of Warcraft, you had PvP servers and you had PvE servers and role-playing servers. Role-playing servers had the PvE rule set, which basically meant that if you encountered people from the opposite faction in the wild, they couldn't hurt you. They couldn't kill you and you couldn't kill them.
Okay.
On a PvP server, you would be hostile to each other, and so you could choose if you wanted to kill them, or they could choose to kill you. And it added this certain level of tension. RP servers were originally PvE servers, so that didn't happen. But they introduced this new server type right before the Burning Crusade that changed that. So now you could have a PvP server that was also an RP server, and it added this whole new dimension. Because typically, like, one of the reasons why, like you just mentioned, with role players being the odd ones out, it was because, like, role players were always the weirdos, right? On the PvE servers, you had the people that were going and they wanted to kill, like, raid bosses. And on PvP servers, it was people that were like, oh, we just want to PvP and kill each other. What do the role players want to do? Oh, we want to sit around and just, like, talk at each other. Like, we don't...
Right.
How do you fight?
A big distinction between a person who plays video games and a person who plays Dungeons and Dragons first.
Exactly, right? It's like, but someone that has played video games has no conception of, like, that phase when you're out of combat, just like, which is like the majority of the game, where you're not rolling anything, you're just talking. But that's, that was always the preconception of what a role player was. You're just talking at each other. And so in this, like, RP PvP set, it added this level of danger where it's like, oh yeah, you're role playing, you have a storyline, but it's like, oh, you're like a bunch of, crusaders or something, or like you're a war band and you're out there. Well, now, like, you're not just like, if you get jumped by, like, the opposite faction, you're not just, like, writing your way out of it. You have to, like, there's going to be consequences that are then going to fall on you that you're going to then have to write. So it added this really dynamic element of, like, typically in role playing, it's, like, very controlled, and everyone it's not that you know what's going to happen, but, like, there's an agreed upon, like, set of rules where the chaos is contained. But in that sort of environment, in a PvP environment, someone could just come out and kill everyone, and, like, you don't have to say that, oh, all our characters died, right? You can respawn and whatever, but that's theoretically gonna add something that you can build on, you can write on, which creates some really cool stuff.
So what, if I could echo that back, essentially what you're saying is, with the PvP roleplay servers, there were opportunities for people to both be creating stories with each other by following the rules or the social rules, the unspoken social dynamics, or maybe explicitly spoken sometimes, of a server. And then at the same time, because there was still the PvP server element of it, there is still the element of people who would just show up and gank you, to borrow a term from, I guess, MOBAs, and, like, sort of interrupt the role play with a combat that, even though it didn't follow along the rules of role play as one would expect in a role play server, it still resulted in interesting emergent stories that weren't possible in just the standard role play servers either.
Correct. Yeah. And it had this entire different, like, dynamic and tension, because you would have then storylines cross-faction when, like, if someone betrays you, across your faction, where it's like, oh, you have a meetup for X or Y reason, you're trying to achieve peace or whatever, and then they betray you. It's like, it adds a little bit more weight. Likewise, when you do have that tension of, like, you have, there's a group across the faction, you can't, you struggle to communicate, and you're trying to, and, like, but, like, somehow you're making it work and you're not killing each other. It adds just this, like, this depth, this gravitas behind the interactions. Right. That was just really cool, really meaningful.
Because at any moment, just one of the other players could turn coat and just et tu brute the entire situation. And so, like, it must have felt like a real kind of political dynamic that you were wading through in a fantasy scenario, because you weren't all at one table contributing to one story. You were at multiple tables contributing to multiple stories. And so I guess from my perspective, that sounds like it must have played out a little bit more realistically than one would even experience in a tabletop setting.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
Yeah, and on top of that, you would have the you have like the realm forms, and then under that, people would host their own. So like I hosted my realm had like a secondary form, and you'd have that, which people would like catalog like all these different experiences and storylines on, and they would just build up, and every server would have like this like entirely separate from like the official World of Warcraft lore, this entirely separate like emergent story that was based on what guilds were on the server, what did they do, you know, how did they deal with like this event or that event, and how did they deal with each other. And so you had these guilds that would have like their own internal lore that would be literally pages and pages long, and then you would have like the servers like lore between like all of these different server or all of these different guilds, and like the territories they controlled, and like all of the places that were like their home base and where they would hang out, and these incursions that they'd make. And the thing is, all these systems were not there. The Blizzard they were not in the game. Like Blizzard did not build them. There were some mods that players made that kind of helped out to some extent, but for the most part, there was nothing there. It was all entirely, this is what the server community wanted to do, and so this is what they did. And
they built it on top of what they were doing in the game. And you're saying people were actually writing their own histories of their servers, like as epics?
Yeah.
And I guess because there could be multiple servers, does that mean that World of Warcraft roleplay PvP servers had multiverses of like parallel World of Warcraft timelines of what the stories that the players were telling about their factions in the meantime?
What I like in it too is it's kind of like you have this universe, right, that exists, this fandom universe that exists, and you have like the base rules. And it's like, you know, whenever you play, whenever you sit down for like a tabletop game, like, so if you're going to play D&D or something, everybody's operating off of the same set of rules, basically. Not realistically, but like everyone has the same base. What you choose to do with it, the adventures that you choose to make with it, are entirely up to you. And you just kind of build them from there. So if you're looking at something like, you know, you're like, oh, I want to run a campaign with my friends, your campaign isn't going to look like anybody else's campaign. And think about that. But now think about that on a huge scale, where you're basically running a campaign with 1,000 other people that all have their own storylines, and all of their storylines, just by people deciding, hey, we think it's a cool thing to have this constant story going, they all decide to write it together. So you have this,
it's difficult to even visualize that, because it's so many people. How do you visualize telling everyone's story simultaneously?
Exactly. And that's the thing, is they happen, everyone's stories, like all the guilds that exist, are all doing their own thing at any given time. But sometimes you interact with another group of people, and that interaction might be positive, it might be negative. Some guilds are antagonistic. So, for example, one of the guilds on one of the servers that I played on was a group called the Scarlet Crusade, right?
Okay.
The Scarlet Crusade was like an in-game thing. So, like, if you play World of Warcraft, there's a group called the Scarlet Crusade, and they're these zealous crusader, like they're humans, and they want to kill everyone who's not human, and they even if you're a member of the Scarlet Crusade watching this video right now, shout out in the comments below. Yeah, like they want to murder everybody, but like they in the lore, like they're corrupt or whatever. So there was this guild called the Scarlet March that was basically like, they're not extreme enough, we want to be more extreme than them. And so they would patrol around like the player cities, right? Like imagine like these player characters that are patrolling around, right?
Oh my gosh. A whole group of people who are like, Griffith did nothing wrong.
Yes.
He should have gone harder.
Exactly.
Good Lord.
They're just walking around, and like if you're not a human, so like you're on their faction, right? You know, you could be the alliances like humans, night elves, dwarves, gnomes. So it's like if you're like a night elf and you walk by them, they'll role play throwing like tomatoes at you or like harassing you and like stuff like that, and they would try and start fights.
Oh no. So it was Skyrim's Windhelm before Windhelm, all run by players.
Yeah. So you'd have those people that would act like that, and they would behave like that, and then those crusaders would go out and they would go and they would go and try and like kill like other people from the faction, and they would, you know, make these like try to run like a crusade, right? So like they would do all these things, and of course you would have like the pacifists on your faction that would be like, no, this is wrong, and then they would get into fights. And
the pacifist said, please don't fight, and then they'd get fought.
Of course.
Like real pacifists. That's how it actually happens.
And yeah,
good
like,
Lord, I'm getting so giddy listening to you describe this.
So like think
I'm
about
just
how
like
cool that
everyone is acting a fool, and that's the point.
Yeah, and think about how cool it is though. It's like you have all these groups like in character, they're just butting up against each other all the time, and you have like, you know, 10, 15 active guilds on each faction doing their own thing, and some have nothing to do with anything. Some are like, we're just like a group of adventurers. We're just like a group of adventurers going about the world. We want nothing to do with this. And
we are a guild of gardeners. Would you like to buy our yellow flowers? They come in stacks of 99.
Yeah, like they have nothing to do with anything. And like that was great because like you get this emergent gameplay, you get this emergent storyline that's built on top of like the World of Warcraft that everybody else knows. So like the World of Warcraft that I know, that I had fun with when I was, I don't know, 17, 16, somewhere in there, the World of Warcraft I had fun with then was entirely different than what anybody else had. And so that experience, because like part of it too is like you're doing this, you're in depth, like you're super into this story with other people, because that's the other thing that's cool about role playing is like if you're a writer or you're into writing and like you do that for a little bit, it's cool, but like it is a pain in the ass to get people interested in the things that you're writing. But when you're role playing with people, there's a group of people that are like, they are living on the end of your word, and they just,
they're self-motivated to be there.
And that's just such a like, what a great feeling. And that was what was part of what was so life-changing about it to me, is because at the same time, I guess I was 18, because I was in high school and I graduated, went to college around this time, and near the end of the expansion, I was going to college for engineering, and I had realized near the end of the Burning Crusade, I said to myself after all this writing, I was like, hey, I really like writing, and I think maybe that's what I want to do with my life. So I was so close to having a lucrative career, making a lot of money, but instead I decided that I wanted to be a writer, which has worked out okay for me. But
well, that's good. So that was actually going to be my next question of, so how did the experience change you personally? And I guess I want to dig a little bit deeper than just it changed your career path, and more like not necessarily in terms of the game, because it seems as though the game exposed to you how much you love stories and building them and how they emerge. But I guess more just, what is it about writing that makes it your passion? Because this seems like a very specific impetus to the passion for writing. Most of the writers I know read YA fiction or novels and wanted to write those same things, and you're coming at it from the perspective of having experienced a living story that then motivated you to become a writer. And when you're writing, you don't necessarily have the luxury of seeing those living stories play out. So more about what is it about this kind of story that inspires you?
Let me really throw a wrench into everything for you, because it's a two-parter. The first part is I tricked myself. I thought that the thing that I was into, I thought that the thing that really got me going was the act of writing, the act of creative writing itself, and seeing a reaction out of someone and having that ability to like essentially toy with someone's emotions with your words, right? Where it's like you can have someone just in tears or just laughing or whatever by however you write a particular story. And at first I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'm like, that's it, that's the good stuff right there. Like yeah, like I can just like create these profound emotional reactions in people with just that's nuts.
You wanted power.
But then later on, as I wrote more and more and more and more, what I realized was the thing that like was actually interesting to me wasn't that, but was rather the meta bits of it. So like the thing I realized that was interesting, that was profound to me, and that I wanted to spend time talking about, and I couldn't shut up about to anyone that would listen, was the describing and putting to words and picking apart the environment that led all of that to exist. So I mentioned earlier like the emergent gameplay of it all. I became fascinated by the fact that there was this entire meta-narrative on a realm of World of Warcraft that was created by all of these people organically, that just kind of surged up out of nowhere on top of a game where nothing made them do that. Nothing, they weren't motivated to by the game. There was no prize that it gave them. They just essentially had this base and decided to build something totally unique to that realm on top of it. And the different like interactions between people and how they would build it, and the behavioral things, and how people's identities would get soaked up and just like sucked in to this world. That was fascinating to me. Later, when I was in grad school, I literally did a 30-page paper in a class on the concept of the World of Warcraft like community created meta narrative that is just like free form and just rolling and built on nothing but the willful desire for people to cooperate with one another within a specific rule set that they've built for themselves, and that absolutely there's no moderation. And that was just fascinating to me, because like the things that kind of come out of that, like a lot of the stuff that I talk about in now with like VR chat, with like identity, you started to see shards of that then, where within these completely built up environments, people could then play an identity and try it on, and everybody, like, it's part of the story, so everyone's just gonna play it along with you, and no one's gonna question it because it's part of the story. And that kind of stuff, just, man, that was fodder for maybe my first entire year and a half of grad school. I think was nothing but me writing about World of Warcraft.
I'm going to try to maybe explain this in a way that you haven't heard before, but it sounds to me like you went from creative writing to, I guess you could say, either historical or anthropological, but your method is very personal. It's essentially gonzo journalism. You're putting yourself into the experience and taking the first-hand experiences of people as history rather than writing it after the fact or explaining it with a overarching idea or principle post hoc. And I think that that's something that's extremely valuable, because the people who actually take the time to create what's going to be the primary sources of future works of sociology and anthropology, especially for these times of the internet. Like, we kind of think of ourselves as being fully within the internet age because we've had generations be born with it now, never know a world without it. I think the 90s kids were really the last group of people to have a few years where there was no internet to care about, and then it just became the thing, it became the norm. And so to a certain extent, I just want to like applaud, because that's exactly the opposite kind of writing that I do. I always try to go take an art piece and try to figure out its message and how it should be viewed as a social object, as a part of the social imagination after the fact. And you're really, I guess, your experience in World of Warcraft gave you this, or taught you that you had this innate passion for just exposing people's real experiences and motivations in real time. And that turns out to be quite important to history and how we understand ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. One of the big insights I had, and one of the things that I felt really passionate, the reason I wanted to write about this stuff in grad school in the first place, was because most of when I got into grad school, this is, I don't want to get too off the beaten path here, but
don't worry about it.
One of the experiences that I had, I was going in an English program, and people were theoretically aware of game studies, but I always ran into basically having to do everything by myself. So like, there was no, game studies class or anything like that. So I had to prove myself, which meant that like, if I'm going to buy all of these books that I can find from prominent thinkers in the field, and then try and digest them myself. And it's like, I have this huge just shelf of just like nothing but like game studies books, even still to this day. And
I'm building my shelf of that too. Like when I was in school, there was one class about the history of games, and it was run by the same teacher in the fine arts department who was doing a class on anime as well, and traded them off each semester. And it was just like, the only reason I could take those classes was because I convinced the Asian and Pacific Islander Cultural Studies Department that, hey, a study of games and anime is kind of important to Asian culture, because like half of games comes from Asia, comes from Japan, my guys. And now in the modern day, it's way more than Japan. It's so much of it is Korean and Chinese. It's like, that's Asian culture. It's modern, but that should be a part of your curriculum if you're talking about, if you're teaching a modern curriculum on Asian cultures. It took work, and so I understand what you say when you had to fight for that space of game studies in academia, because it's still so niche. There's really no, unless you're going to a specific game development school, and even then I think maybe the more abstract or the sociological aspect of games are kind of put on the back burner, as like, those are your high concept classes, but really you need to learn how to program, how to model, and get on the pragmatic grind.
Yep, 100%. That's what I found at my university. There was a game design program, but it was, none of this stuff, right? One of my advisors was like, hey, you should go over there and like talk to them. And I tried, and they were not interested in any of the stuff that I was doing, right? And just, bring this back to what I was saying, in the process of like reading all this and doing all this, you would always see these sort of narratives about things like World of Warcraft, where it was always written as like, oh, like, these people just wasting their time, or like not doing anything, like that kind of stuff. And
the South Park episode stereotype.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was not my experience. You know, very much being in this culture for years and years, I met people that were profoundly creative, that were some of the best writers that, you know, I had ever read. And I say that as someone with a master's in English. I've been through the classics like many times.
He knows what he's talking. They know what they're talking about, people.
Yeah, like,
come on.
It's something that like I felt like I had to prove to people. And I find that that's also part of that was that in those conversations, in the role play, and what people were doing in the communities they found was fundamentally, it was humans that are telling stories to each other that had deep meaning to them for one reason or another. And sometimes they're silly, they're just having fun, but there's something really meaningful within that play that's worth talking about.
Well, absolutely. Within play, within levity or comedy, that's where people often feel most comfortable to express what's meaningful to them, because humor allows us to drop the social barriers a little bit. It gives us permission to be light, and by having permission to not be serious about something, we're able to express our real values without offending others.
Yeah, and it's this place where I just, you know, I don't want to say I was offended, but like you get to these places online where I would read all of the stuff, or in academia I would read all this stuff about like this kind of take, and I was just like, no, these are people that are putting together these stories that, you know, have as much meaning as any other stories, and to some extent, you know, have these deep connections. I think where all of this kind of comes together, like the World of Warcraft stuff for me, like the stories that people would tell each other and the way that they would get seen as like just this like, oh, it's like not important, or these are just weirdos or whatever, is I always have felt that in online communities there are people that are essentially just looking for connection with one another. They're just looking to tell each other their stories, whether those are literal stories, as in like, this is my fantasy story, or it's like a life story. It's someone that is coming out and saying something along the lines of like, hey, this is who I am, right? And I'm just trying to be a person. I'm just trying to find my truth, whatever that happens to be. And I find that the academia, media, whoever, they tend to look at these places and always see them as like a freak show rather than seeing the humanity there. And I think something that I've, you know, in 2007, 2008 to present day, something that I've always had this urge, even though if I've only really recently figured out what it is this profound need to kind of take people inside these communities that just get like thrown off as just a bunch of weirdos or a bunch of nerds or whatever, and show people the actual merit in those places that is otherwise being ignored.
Right. You're bringing the humanity out of the places, not showing, or I guess you could say not humanizing them, but humanizing the observer. To actually bridge that empathy gap for something that's just a little different from themselves. And to that extent, it also functions to invite people in to reach out to those people who need to form those connections, who don't feel they have those spaces, and who can find those spaces so long as they knew that they were there. And I think to that extent, not just from an academic or historical point of view, but from just the base level of someone out there probably needs to know that that option exists, because that's the thing that they're looking for. They just don't know it yet. That is, on an individual, personal level, very important. And like, I know from having watched your videos myself that there is a personability to all the people that you're speaking to and speaking of. And there is, I guess you could say, a bravery to them to be so willing to put that out there and show people. And it's it's honestly inspiring to see that people are not, well, I guess maybe to some extent, sometimes people put on a different face for the fun of it, but very often people just put on their authentic self, and turns out the authentic self is fine. And we can all get down with the authentic self. And for whatever reason, these online social spaces often function to bring out the authentic self, whereas in-person social spaces hide it away.
Yeah, whether it's World of Warcraft or VR chat or what have you, there's these spaces on the internet that people go to, and they get to express themselves in a very specific way that's meaningful to them. And I think what people tend to miss is that in places of expression, those are places where people can get in touch with themselves in a way that's you can't anywhere else. And it's so easy to look at, like when someone's role playing or someone's being an anime girl or whatever. It's so easy to just other them and to say, oh, like this is just like some weirdo, just trying to, they're dressing up as an anime girl because they just want to look at an anime girl's like body or something, or they're just playing a fantasy game because like it's just like they're a nerd and it's just escapism. People don't look at the layer that's a little bit beneath that, where it's no, someone's role playing because hey, they can tell a story with a group of people that are genuinely going to be interested and invested in it in a way that's going to allow them to connect on a meaningful level and tell stories the same as you would anywhere else, but in a very interactive way that's unique to the gaming space. Or, if someone's an anime girl, it allows them to maybe talk to a bit of their identity that they otherwise couldn't safely anywhere else. So, this is like two very different ways of identity exploration, but at the core of it, that's essentially what it is. And to allow people to do that and to give it like some importance, that's like, hey, this is worth studying, this is worth looking at, this is worth doing yourself. I think that's really important. I think it's something that we need to do more in the gaming space, period. I'm all for the taking a piece of art and breaking it down and figuring out the meaning behind it. But I think something that often gets left out of the humanities in general is the humanity of the people that are creating the art, that are needing the art, that use the art essentially as an outlet, as a medium to convey some kind of thing about themselves. And I find that very often in modern academia and even modern YouTube videos, everything like that gets ignored for the sake of like, hey, this big point I have to make.
Yeah, not just the art or the artist, but the people's interaction with the art is as important to the conversation as anything else. And hopefully we're starting to learn that more as gaming becomes a more prominent art form, where, well, it is kind of already the most prominent art form, but people are paying attention more now. And maybe we are as a society, the society that we're living in, that we're a little bit at least more open to the idea that interaction with art is also art and needs to be focused on. Well, I hate to go off on me having the last word, so let me just go ahead and ask you where people can find you. I'll definitely include links in the description below, and also I know you're currently taking a little bit of a break, but when you're all done with your vacation, what can people look forward to? What's next for Straws Films?
You can find me in a bunch of places. The easiest is obviously on YouTube. Just youtube.com/StrazFilms, or you can go to watch.straz.tv because I'm cheesy like that. Alternatively, you can find me on Twitter. I believe I am StrazVR. And those are the two big places. Or you can find me on VR chat as just Straz if you want to say hello. That's fine too. As far as what I have in store next, I don't want to give too much away just yet, but I will say that
Oh, I can't get the exclusive?
no. I am going back to my roots, though. I am going to do another video on VR chat, as haven't done one in over a year, actually. I've been doing touching on some other stuff, but not VR chat. But I think enough time has gone by where I feel like I can touch it and say something actually fresh again, without kind of just doing the same old, same old.
Right. Well, that's exciting, and I bet a lot of other people are going to be excited for that too. I can't wait to find out what the actual topic is. I know the medium, but I don't know what you're going to talk about. This is exciting. Great. Well, thank you so much, Straz. I will definitely want to catch up with you more in the future, but for now, let's go ahead and say goodbye to all of the lovely people at home. Make sure to go and find Straws. If you're finding him through me, please check them out. They make amazing content that you probably aren't going to see anywhere else on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and that's a podcast.